Thank you, Senator Padilla. Well, as we've been discussing throughout this hearing, we have been subjected to consistent cyber attacks, ransomware in particular, and attacks against critical infrastructure. And Secretary Mayorkas, in your opening statement, you discussed a number of activities the DHS is engaged in an attempt to mitigate the impact of these attacks or prevent these attacks from occurring in the first place. And as you know, and I believe you've been briefed and your staff has been working with Ranking Member Portman and I on legislation to provide the government with incident reporting on cyber incidents and ransomware attacks in particular, but broadly encompassing all cyber attacks. So Secretary Mayorkas, could you tell this committee how this kind of authority to collect this information, how will that help you prevent cyber attacks from occurring in the first place and ensure that our critical infrastructure can operate the way it should?
Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Portman, we're very grateful for this committee's support of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. That legislation, which calls for a new reporting regime, will be of tremendous value in elevating the cybersecurity of this country, because it really requires a public-private partnership. And if, in fact, for example, a company that suffers a cyber incident provides that information to us in the federal government, then we can ensure that a replicate of that harm is not suffered elsewhere in the country. If everyone is compelled to provide incident information to us, then we learn from one, we learn from two, and collectively then we disseminate to all, and that raises the cyber hygiene of the landscape writ large.
Thank you. And Director Wray, I know ransom payment information is of importance to the FBI. Could you tell the committee how important that is and how this legislation will help you?
Absolutely. I think the key will be to make sure that the information reaches the FBI real time, because as I testified in response to one of the earlier questions, speed, hours matter in this particular arena. Getting the information from the private sector on a more consistent and timely basis will be critical for us at the FBI as well for, I think, 5 reasons. One, it allows us to better understand the full extent of the threat of particular intrusion sets nationwide. Second, it enhances our ability to warn about trends, tactics, techniques, procedures in a much more meaningful way. Third, it allows us to provide support for a greater number of victims and collect more evidence and therefore bring more cases. Fourth, it allows us to help connect seemingly unrelated incidents into attribution to a single actor, which is incredibly valued in its own right to ensure that we're holding them accountable for the full extent of their activity. But then last but not least, it allows us to follow the money and in many cases seize it. And I can't underscore enough how important that is. Our strategy is to go after the actors, their infrastructure, and their money, and legislation like this would help us do that as long as we get the information, real time.
Thank you. On March 2021, National Intelligence Report assessed that domestic violent extremists were, and I quote, the most persistent and lethal threat, unquote, to the United States. The FBI has found the same, and I helped pass a requirement in the fiscal year 20 NDAA that required both the FBI and the DHS to report data on this threat. Yet both of your agencies took close to a year to provide roughly half of the response that we were looking for, a year to provide half. And Director Wray, in the case of the FBI, half would be a very generous assessment of what the FBI provided. It's considerably less than that. And if we can't get that kind of data, it's difficult for us to understand what the efforts are, what efforts are being made and how we might be able to support those efforts. You have reporting requirements under the law, and I would hope that you would comply on time and in full. Can I get a commitment that we can get the rest of that information that's well over a year past the expected date?
Well, certainly you can have my commitment that we're going to do better and work with you as quickly as we can to get you the information that we can. Part of the challenge that we're not happy about is, of course, the pandemic hit, and many of the people that were involved in pulling together the information were either otherwise occupied with the significant domestic terrorism operations that we had or otherwise sidelined. The other part of it is, as I understand it, a lot of the information may be information that wasn't collected or kept in a way that the committee might have been looking for. So you are absolutely right that we need to do better than we have, and you have my commitment that we will do better than we have. But I understand we have a regular cadence now of engagement with your staff, prioritizing the items that you need soonest, and you have my commitment that we'll work with you on that.
Well, I appreciate that, and we will we'll be continuing to reach out to get that to happen. You know, experts have assessed that in the last 5 years, domestic extremist groups have expanded their use of online platforms to recruit, plan, export, and spread violence and terrorize Americans. Last week, I wrote a letter to the heads of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube seeking information, including their efforts to coordinate with federal, state, and local governments to detect and to prevent online extremist efforts. So my question to you, Director Wray, is we're less than a year past the violent January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol and an attempt to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, which is without question a dark stain on our history, all of which was planned, organized, and spread online. So my question is, what specific steps is the FBI doing now to combat the use of social media to plan domestic terrorist attacks? Have you stepped up your activities, and give us a sense of what you are doing?
So certainly when it comes to social media, when we get tips and leads, we're trying to make sure that those are being prioritized and pursued. We're trying to improve our own communications with the social media companies. That partnership, as you and I have discussed before in the election influence context, has continued to improve. And so we're trying to leverage that a little bit. Among the other things that we're trying to do are build out our human source base better so that we can separate kind of the wheat from the chaff within the social media information that we get, because the volume of this stuff is just astounding. And then last, we're also looking at better use of data analytics, again, to try to see if we can separate the wheat from the chaff within the information that we get. Certainly when it comes to looking at social media, there are longstanding Department of Justice policies, the so-called Attorney General guidelines, and the DIOG that have been in place for 15, 16, maybe more years that kind of govern what we can and cannot do, and it gets a complicated subject to explain. But we are committed to aggressively acting in this space just as we are in others. I would say, of course, I know that DHS also plays a very important role in looking at social media, and we benefit from the partnership with them on that subject. There are things that they can do as part of their mission that we can't and don't.
Thank you. Ranking Member Portman, you're recognized.